Manskin by M.S. Waddell. He came towards the door of the house, and there was someone else standing in the porch, fumbling for a key. The young man had his in his hand, and the other stood aside and let him open the door, then stepped behind him into the hallway. The young man switched on the light and started to climb the stairs past the numbered green doors. Before he had reached the second landing, the light went out. He stopped, hand resting upon the banister. Odd. The other man must have put it off. Then he heard the slip-slop of it slowly dragging up after him, and saw the dark shape of the other in the stairwell. There was no other light switch, nothing he could do about it at all, in fact. Beyond going back down the stairs he already climbed to switch it on again at the bottom. He found that he didn't want to go past the other again. It was not a rational fear, but it grew in him as the other's steps brought it shuffling up the stairs, its form still mingled with the darkness, as though it were a part of it. He began to climb, and it seemed to him that the dark thing behind him increased its pace to keep up with him. Now and then he thought he could hear its laboured breath. Now and again the old house creaked under his feet. There was absolutely nothing to be afraid of. So he stopped on the fourth landing and waited for it to follow him up. But it did not come. He had heard no door open. Until the moment of his stopping he had been conscious of the movement behind him on the stairs. It had not gone away. It was there, somewhere, behind him. When he had stopped, so had it. It was plainly waiting for him to start again. It was following him. He started slowly back down the stairs. Something moved, scuttled, down there in the darkness. "Hello?" he said. Then he called down the stairwell. "Are you there?" There was no reply. He came to the second landing. He was beginning to wonder if he hadn't imagined the whole thing. There was no one there in the darkness, no one at all. Going any farther was daft. So he quickly lit a cigarette. He turned with the lighted match still in his hand, and it was standing there beside him, its body drawn up into the doorway, its white plastic face towards him, weak yellow eyes watching him. "Are you ill?" he said. It grinned and it nodded, and the lax skin of its throat flapped against its long jaw. Then it put out an arm and caught his sleeve and drew itself against him, so that he found he was supporting its weight. It opened its mouth to speak, and nothing came, although its lips moved around its yellowed teeth, and its tongue darted furtively to and fro inside. It was capable of no intelligible sound. He started up the stairs with it. There wasn't much else he could do. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody else to help. If the other did live in the house, it would surely stop at its own door. If it didn't, it would still have to be put somewhere for the night at least. So he climbed the stairs, less surely now, for the other's body weighed upon him. He found the guttural rasp of its breath through its open mouth distasteful. The webbing of its arms around him seemed to draw strength from him. With one long nail it scratched and tested the pink skin of his neck. The young man reached his own door and turned the key, and they went through into the little corridor. The other doors that opened off it were all closed. No light showed from any of the other bedsits, so there was no chance of anybody else being able to help him. He walked the thing down the corridor to his own room, then rested its weight against the wall as he searched for the second key. He opened the door and switched on the light and turned to find that the thing had followed him inside, that it shielded its weak eyes from the glare of the lamp, arm flapping across its face. It sat on the bed and sank its face down onto its chest and looked at the floor as the young man took off his coat. Damp and cold and stiff the poor thing was. Grey fingers laced by its throat fumbled across its face. Strands of white hair floated across its brow from beneath the peaked cap it wore. Its black coat was frayed and tattered. Blue tennis shoes without laces peeped from the folds of the coat where it flopped on the floor, grotesquely too large for the poor thing. The young man picked up his shiny tin kettle and went down the corridor to the bathroom to fill it. The thing unbuttoned its coat and laid its canvas cloth on the table. When the young man returned, the light was out. He reached for the switch, clicked it, and nothing happened. He took a cautious step into the room and the thing's cold hand came across his face. Its fingers lodged on his chin and forced back his head. The blood in his mouth was his own, and the twist of the meat skewer in his throat brought him gurgling to the bed, where the thing landed on his chest. At that point the young man died. The swift stroke of the scalpel was on dead flesh, and his eyes, placed carefully in the ashtray, were unseeing. It was evening again. It had been back to the bedsit. Shivering cold, the poor thing came across the allotment, carefully skirting the points where the light from the street lamps flirted with the orderly furrows of the earth. Over its shoulder hung a sack which flapped against its scrawny body. It was lithe and quick now. Soft air surged against its feet. Yellow grass by the allotment edge stood as high as the knee of its baggy trousers. Into the allotment shed it went, closing the door behind it. It lit the oil lamp and untied its sack. It held the thing before it, stroked and probed and tested with its teeth. It was enjoying itself. Poor thing that it was, it had little enjoyment. It drew off its red rubber gloves and laid them back in the canvas cloth. There was the other thing in the sack to attend to. So it started out across the allotment again, pit-patting furtively across the soft earth, soft damp warmth of the thing in the sack against its shoulder. It put the sack down by the side of the manhole, painfully eased up the cover. Soft damp things down there in the darkness. It held the sack over the hole and the thing plopped and trickled down. Sour, sweet smell. It let the manhole cover slide back into position, started back across the criss-crossing paths. The man by the allotment fence watched the poor thing go. Doubt played with his mind but didn't bring him to a decision. Whatever was going on was the other fellow's business. So he started down the road to home and decided to forget about it. "Arthur," he said to himself, "keep your nose out of it." Just time to go home and change, then back to the pub. Arthur Lawton was looking forward to getting to the pub. He forgot all about the thing and its sack. His skin was thick and coarse and kept his innards warm. He would have done well to remember. The poor damp thing stood in the darkness by the door of the junk shop. It still wore its heavy coat, but now there wasn't a white hair to be seen beneath its cap. Its chin still rested on its chest, as though the breastbone had risen up to meet it. It was looking at its tennis shoes, but in reality was watching the young man behind the counter. "Selling 'em, Dad?" the young man asked. The poor thing shivered. The young man handled the clothes with distaste. He became conscious of the frightened yellow eyes that watched him, the hands that played across the fragile face, tattered sleeves, bony wrists, dirty hands, dirty old man. Always bringing in clothes. Could be his own. Always about the size. Probably not, though. Sailor's things once. And a dark corporation coat another time. Rag and bone. But then he never made a bargain. Took anything. Funny. "Where'd you get him, Dad?" he asked, fingering the cloth. It had been a reasonably good suit once. Its grey fingers flew to its mouth. It seemed to speak, but its words were lost entirely in the furtive cluster of its fingers. "Speak up, Dad." It advanced from the shadow. It put its hand on the suit and tried to tug it from his grasp. "Here, Dad," the young man said. It let out a whimpering sound and withdrew its hand, which flashed up to its face again, played with the loose skin of its throat. It stood mouthing before him, feverishly moving its lips behind its fluttering palm. The young man picked the suit up. Its eyes followed him anxiously. "You've got a lot of these, ain't you, Dad?" the young man said. "You do keep bringing 'em in. Where are you getting them, then? Not nicking 'em, are you?" It shivered. Its hand groped forward again, trying to take back the suit. Well, it was money for old Rope. No names, no pack drill. What if he was pinching them? The old fool was off his nut. "Okay, Dad," the young man said, swiftly dragging the suit to his side of the counter. The grimy note which he fished out from the box beneath the counter was quickly covered by its hand. It tucked the note away. Methodically, the young man ran his fingers through the pockets. The heavy watch flopped out on the counter. The young man tried to cover it with the cloth, but the frightened eyes had seen it. "Giving it away, are you?" the young man asked. It had turned for the door. It grasped the handle and turned it the wrong way. The young man came round the counter holding the watch. It started to shake the door. "Here, Dad," the young man said. "Do leave off." It looked over its shoulder at the advancing youth and gabbled something soundless. Then it managed to open the door and thrust itself clear of the young man's restraining hand. It bobbed off down the road in the darkness, long legs flapping. When it finally stopped, it was back in the shadows by the canal bank, where nobody could see it. It slipped off its cap and put it into its pocket, then let its fingers slip rapidly over its bald head. It shouldn't have come out without its hair. Arthur Lawton's lonely song soared over the allotments. Cheery and beery as he was, not cold, for the drink in him made the whole world warm and happy. Long past the point of caring exactly where he was going, he allowed himself to be guided by it. It appeared from nowhere and took his arm. Arthur was convinced that more hospitality lay ahead. They picked their way through the plots to the allotment shed. Arthur completed the last 100 yards with the assistance of its wiry arm laced firmly round his middle. The door of the allotment shed opened to its touch, and Arthur staggered in with it. It lit the oil lamp, while Arthur sat on an upturned packing case, enjoying counting his feet. They had become confused. 2 he had. Of that he was certain. It was merely a matter of reassurance. Touching each foot, with difficulty he finally established that all was well. Quantity and quality. He screwed himself back into an upright position, taking the tin mug that was offered to him. The light from the oil lamp glistened on its damp face, showed the thin streak of black hair that now graced its brow. It surveyed Arthur with a business-like smile on its thin lips. Like a bloody vampire, he thought, in a lucid movement. Its fingers played across its face, eased the flap of loose skin that fell across its forehead. Weak eyes watched Arthur as he drank. Arthur started to talk to it. It had nothing to say to him, but Arthur did not notice. He was altogether preoccupied with his own problems. Words seemed to come from him with great ease. Fluency of thought made him sob with the very impact of his own meaning on his mind. They were all barbarians, and Christ was crucified. It had turned away from him and was bending over a sheet in the corner where it fiddled through the pile of implements it kept clean and sharp for the job. It took out a long kitchen knife and placed it on the canvas cloth it had spread on the earth floor. The thick rubber gloves which it put on covered its thin arms to the elbow. It slipped its hair from its head and put it carefully away. Arthur became aware of the change in its attitude gradually. He felt a hand on his arm, persuading him to drink again. The tin mug which was thrust into his hand was filled with a liquid yet more satisfying than the one before. He felt no compunction at all at letting it lower him from the packing case to the centre of the canvas cloth. The thing was tender with him, and he was very fond of it. Oh yes, very fond indeed. Putting one tired foot after another, the policeman brought himself up the road by the allotments. Life was difficult. He had another 3 hours on duty and no way of knowing what was going on at home, and whether she was going to change her mind. If she didn't change her mind, he would have to switch the dates, and that would create all sorts of difficulties. He saw the light in the allotment shed and wondered idly what was going on there. He'd noticed it before and wondered about it. Some poor soul married to a nagger. He paused by the canal bank, wondering if it was worth a look. It was odd, and if anything was going on. He turned out of his way and moved between the allotments towards the lighted shed. The light went off. He quickened his step. 4 minutes brought him to the door. Nothing had passed him. The door was locked when he tried it. He knocked. He went to the back and tried the windows. They were closed tightly. Instinct told him that there was someone inside. He stood before the door and spoke through it. No answer. Somebody would have a key. He went off to fetch it. 40 minutes later he came back across the allotment. There was still no light in the shed, and he was beginning to wonder if there was any point in it. Again he tried knocking on the door and flashing his torch through the window. Again he had no success. He opened the door and flashed his torch inside. A lawnmower, a workbench, 4 packing cases, a tarpaulin on the floor, rolled up in a bundle. He stepped in, guided his torch round the wall. There was a small instrument on the edge of the packing case, a scalpel. He bent beside the tarpaulin, prodded it with his finger. It was soft. Propping the torch up on the packing case, he unrolled the tarpaulin, and the raw, bleeding thing fell out onto the ground before him. Tissue and muscle, and sinew, and the shiny knobs of bones practically intact. A soft mass that he knew for a man by the shape. Eyes in lidless sockets, fleshless limbs that stuck together, lipless mouth, and bared brain. There was a floppy pink something folded neatly beside it. Manskin. It was 4 hours later when they finally established where it lived. No one really seemed to know anything about it. It came and went from the allotment muffled up against the cold. It fled from people. It had no friends. No two people could even agree on the colour of its hair. They surrounded the house at 3 in the morning. They came equipped to deal with it, but uneasy. Soft, skinless bodies they had found. That was quite bad enough. When it opened the door to them, it looked innocent. Its white hair flapped over its brow, and it seemed to know quite well why they had come for it. It had been sitting by its sewing machine, stitching. The needle still nestled in the plump flesh. It was making itself a set of combinations to keep it warm, poor thing. Like a deflated balloon, the skin lay across the table, knotted arms and knotted legs to stop the bleeding. It was a bit big for the poor thing, in need of trimming. Then it would be skin tight, like the others.